how much we reproduce racist understandings when critiquing racism. Maybe there could be like colonialism and racism, and those create an environmental issue.
You cannot see the monster you created.
Oh, if you only work hard now, in the future you will be better off, or something like this. And of course there's a certain level to how this can make sense. But on the scale that we are talking about, when it comes to the idea of development nowadays, it often disregards then the actual structural limitations that are put to like different people. You have a lot of trees and people think that's a forest, but actually it's like much more like a plantation.
To what extent should the Global South be concerned with the green movement?
And so, for example, there's actually tons of literature about like how the Irish became white and stuff like this.
Same for Italians, I think.
Exactly. But in the project of like European conquest, like you can still see very clearly how certain nations have been benefiting more than others from this process quite clearly.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Marginalised Notes. It's 10 in the morning and the weather is too cold for a North African like yours truly, and we are going to talk about climate change and my favorite Gen Z Swede, Greta Thunberg, and we're going to talk about how the left is failing everyone but capitalists in Germany. And today I have Florian Karl with me. He's a writer, researcher, and a community organizer and late-stage PhD researcher, which sounds like a medical condition, but it's not.
Feels
Do your
like
PhD. Florian, how are you?
Hi,
It's good to have you here. About your own interests, what you're working on, and the personal relations with this.
Okay, short and entertaining.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, where to start? I mean, I'm always curious, like when I have to, when I get this question, I know it's going to come, right? Because usually it's how you start, like to introduce each other and get to know each other. But there's so much to like, how do you position yourself? Like, what's the story that you tell, and who do I choose to be like today in presenting myself? And of course, it's like super complex, and there's so many ways that you can start. I think how I'm feeling today, how I got to my research.
Yes.
How I got to my research.
You have so many interesting themes that you discuss in your research.
Yeah.
You talk about Indigenous people in Europe, Scandinavian countries. You talk about the relationship between racism, fascism, colonialism, and green policies. Green policies are something that is portrayed as the epitome of good. You're evil if you're against the environment, right? But then you come and you say, well, yeah, but there is more to that.
Yeah.
There is something more to that. There is something about the dynamics, there's something about the politics around it, internationally or locally, that we need to talk about. And yeah, I'm interested to know, what is the story behind this? How did you come to care about such topics?
I think it was like probably in my youth, when I was around like 14 or so. I remember like going to the first meetings. Actually, at the time, I was trying to reach out to some different larger environmental NGOs in southern Germany, where I grew up. And they never responded. So I was like, seriously, like, come on. Like, you have like this young person here who is clearly interested. Like, they are actually making an effort to reach out to you, and you're not even bothering to send back an email. It's like, screw that. Like, and I started to engage like instead with some different local mobilizations that were starting at the time in the city where I was living, in Stuttgart. And I found first like kind of a community there that I was working with. It was mostly focusing on like a large-scale infrastructure project in the city called Stuttgart 21. It's still ongoing. We don't need to get into it. It was a mess. It is a mess. And from there on, sort of, I was part of mobilizing in the city and in the region. I remember the first meeting that I went. It was super fun. I went with a friend. She was actually 13 at the time. So we were like both like mini versions of ourselves.
Okay.
Coming into this room. And there was about like 40 people. And the average age like bumped like down like crazy when we entered, because everyone else was like 50 plus or something like this. They're looking at us and were like, are you lost? Like, why are you even here? But in the end, I saw like, and I've been kind of part in helping out like in this mobilization, and it had been growing throughout this time from the first protest that I joined, where we were maybe a couple of hundred people, to over 100,000 in the street. And being part of this mobilization was like a super strong learning environment for me, especially as I was very young, right? Also, because I always enjoyed like jumping through different parts of this movement. So like engaging on the one hand, like being out in the street, just talking with people, like what's important for you within the city that you live in, like what do you care about, what are the topics, and first just trying to listening to people actually what they care about, and then to understand through all of this big mass of people that were slowly like joining the mobilization, how we can connect the dots between all of those different concerns that people had in the city, and how this infrastructure project was like neglecting those like massively, basically, in the end of the day. And so at the same time, slowly I also started to engage more with environmental organizations through some friends of mine who had been part. Others also actually joined this more local mobilization. And so I was kind of really jumping between like backroom talks with some people that I knew in the local government who wanted to know more from the grassroots, whatever. Then some different NGOs that I was working with. And just a group of friends that I organized with. And so over the years, this grew, and like I was doing lots of different things. I lived in the north of Ireland for a while, actually, where I also learned a lot about things like colonialism, of course, and sectarianism is like a really, so like kind of Catholic versus Protestant
So when you talk
issues.
about during that early stage of activism, 13 years old, 14 years old, you're talking just about projects of infrastructure that are affecting the community, the local community, and the relation between this and climate change. And then it broadened with your travels also.
Yeah, I mean, this project, for example, that's why I was saying, like, let's not get into it too much, because it's like really massively, like they are investing billions in the city, and it impacts like everything from housing security to the infrastructure of the city, like both during the building period, but also later. It was like destroying and is destroying actually some of the oldest parts of like a park in the city center, which is one of the last like parks that is significant in the city. In the end, this actually has a huge influence on the air in the city, because of how the city is built, like in a valley, and how the air moves through the city, and it also influences the groundwater and how it flows through the city. Like there's so many layers. There's corruption involved, and it's part also of this larger European vision that they have about connecting different capitals. So yeah, it's really massive, and I think this was always something that spoke to me in a way, how like different issues are not like single issues, but they actually spill over and like kind of intensify each other to different degrees.
And then with Ireland, we have, well, you were introduced to deeper understanding of the theme of colonialism and sectarianism, etc.
Yeah.
But that theme of infrastructure and how it affects the community, that also resonates with what you wrote about when you wrote about the Sami people, because you're also talking about infrastructural projects that are affecting communities, but in this case we are talking about indigenous communities in Europe, which was something, and I have to admit, I told you about this also, when I read about this, I honestly didn't know that there were indigenous communities in Europe, in Scandinavian countries. These are countries that brand themselves to be progressive. This is an international brand for Scandinavian countries, and we have even they are used as an example for progressiveness with discussions, elsewhere. And now you come and talk about green policies and about these Scandinavian countries, but from an angle that no one talked about, or at least not that I know of. And you talk about colonialism in that context, and you talk about how green policies are affecting indigenous people in that context. Tell me about that. Tell me the story from the beginning about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, first of all, definitely there's a lot of people talking about it. It's just that, they are marginalized in conversations, and if people are not marginalized, then sort of there's also a certain like there's this concept of the talented tenth. I don't know if you heard about it before. It comes from a sociologist, Du Bois, but also there's like nowadays researcher work with this. For example, Joy James is she's really great, and how sort of movements can be captured basically or appropriated by using like fragmentations in the movement. So, for example, like the voices that you will maybe hear about this, we also have to be careful about why are those the people that we get to hear, right? Because they don't, like, people are not homogenous, like they don't necessarily represent like the whole movement, the whole community, the whole people and everything. So I'm just saying this that in the way, like, and this applies to me as well. Just to be clear, like, kind of with where we come from. And so even the voices that we do get to see, like, there's a certain cost, like, in a way, how we need to adapt to certain spaces, like when we make interviews in media or something like this, for example, as well, and how we are asked to tell a story that fits in the overall narrative there. And with the Sami, like, you can see this quite well. And there's one moment that I still like remember quite well. It was awesome when artist and musician called Sophia Yanok was interviewed in a Swedish media. And she was asked by the interviewer, like, how does it feel to be a Sami, like, and colonized and stuff like this? Paraphrasing here. And she was basically answering, how does it feel to be a colonizer? And the guy was just like, of course, shut up through this, because he didn't really have an answer, like how to deal with it. And as maybe some people will know, like, this is actually a question that kind of echoes a lot Frantz Fanon's writing as well, right? Because he was looking into this. And so this is basically the approach that I'm taking to trying to understand what is happening there as well when it comes to the Sami people.
Can we talk about this part a bit more? Because Fenon especially is very dear to my heart. And, and when we talk about Fenon, we usually talk about Fenon and North Africa, we talk about Fenon and Latin America, but we don't talk about Fenon and Scandinavian countries.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Talk to me about that. Like, tell me more about
this
that.
Is a bit of a, I don't know. Like, for me, I think Fanon, but a lot of kind of in context of a lot of Caribbean thinkers, has been really shaping a lot of my thinking quite significantly, actually.
Okay.
It's sort of the idea from one researcher called Tiffany Litabo King, and they are writing about to be pulled offshore, and from that to test the navigational skills of critical analysis and understanding as I'm approaching back like to Europe as the territory that we know, and how much sort of explanatory value do the different theories have as I'm navigating, like sort of trying to get to land again. And a lot of Caribbean thinkers like Fenon, and there's Aimé Césaire, there's Glissant, Edouard Glissant, and Sylvia Wynter, just to name a few people. They are all actually themselves recognizing to some extent a link to Fanonian thinking as well, if they are not have been contemporaries, actually indirectly, been in touch with them. But then there's also, you find like a broader research tradition that engages with Fanonian thinking, for example. I feel like this is something that must be some kind of Western centrism or Eurocentrism. Why oftentimes I find when you speak about Fanon, it's almost like people are like, yeah, okay, we have a lot of respect and recognize like his research legacy in a way. But do you really engage like with the whole, with all of the people that came afterwards and that came before that actually have influenced and continue to influence this kind of thinking? And so there's Glenn Coulthard that lives in Turtle Island and is from Turtle Island. And also he has engaged a lot with like Fanonian thinking. And so I'm like looking into all of these research traditions that are connected to Fanon and how they make sense of what is happening to people, I guess. And now, because my background is like in a Western European context, that's where I am looking at. So, for example, with the Sami as well, I'm not like
exactly.
I'm not like a Sami myself. So I know that the people that I come from do have a relationship with the Sami, and there's no point in avoiding this, or it would be actually pretty fatal to avoid it, as a lot of people are like, or are silencing those relationships. And I'm going in there and being like, oh, this is uncomfortable, let's stay here. But also actually it can bring a lot of joy, because you are through sort of engaging with this more difficult, maybe to have conversations, you also allow yourself to become different versions of yourself as you go, almost, because you're more honest with like, yeah, my people have these relationships, and there's no point in making them sound like better than what they are. But also acknowledging those and recognizing those relationships can help you to do something about it, right? Because otherwise, before, you have just been ignoring those, or have been maybe portraying them in a better light than what they actually are.
Let me rewind a bit and make sure that I understood right. And I'm going to talk very frankly. And let's see if there is a good yet uncomfortable conversation to have here. You're talking about a relationship that you have with the Sami people. But this relationship represents a relationship with ancestry that had certain privilege over these communities. And honestly, I don't believe this is only a white thing, just to be clear, because Egypt, Sudan, for example, there are certain things that Egyptians are very uncomfortable addressing or talking about, but they need to. We need to. But that's also, it has its different nuances, because even within these relationships, you still have the Brits, you have the British there. Let me take this just to ask about how do you see this connection, because this is one of the things that is used against our generation's engagements. Especially, one of the things that I used, you have these demonstrations going out and coming out in the UK, in Germany even, and whatever. And then one of the, discourses that is discouraging this is using the idea of, it's just your white guilt, etc. What's your take on that?
I would say, like, mostly, like, this idea is a you problem. Like, if you feel guilty about something, then, as it says already, like it's your thing to deal. It actually does not help the people or the struggle like that you that you engage with at all, that you feel guilty about yourself for whatever aspects like of your ancestry or your class background or anything like this, right? Or other kind of privileges or advantages, actually, more, I guess, because privileges can be like
guilt is not the answer.
No, I don't think so. Okay. No. And also here, I mean, I don't know, but for example, in Christianity, guilt plays like a really important role in paralyzing people also a lot. And so there's always this, especially when it comes to, for example, also groups like Fridays for Future, like youth organizing, that there's sort of this idea of a primordial debt. So basically, like you are born into a world that is indebted to the kind of history that we tell about how we got here. Yeah. So we are indebted to like capitalist progress, and therefore it's kind of portrayed as if we owe it to capitalism to reproduce it or something like this, you know. And the same is true for racism and colonialism and things like that. And yeah, I just don't necessarily agree with it. I think you can, no, I definitely don't agree with it. Like, and it's not just a matter of agreement, to be honest, because like people are dying. So like this is, it's for me not really a matter of like belief or anything in that regard. It's really like killing like worlds, killing people, killing our planet. And so there's no way to even pretend that we can maintain the type of systems that have been created throughout like the recent like few hundred years, basically since the beginning of European conquest, I would say.
How do you perceive also the idea of having certain responsibility? And I'm not trying here to impose a certain view, but I'm really curious. How do you think about responsibility of global North towards global South, that those with consciousness in the global North are responsible to remedy the effects or the implications, the results that the global South is suffering from nowadays? Do you think there is a certain sense of responsibility in that regard? And can this also be tricky in a way? Savior complex, etc. So is there a responsibility, and how we can have a certain healthy responsibility where it doesn't turn into also like I'm gonna save you because I'm responsible for this?
Oh, right. Yeah, okay. Like the savior complex kind of thing. I mean, yes, definitely. I think there's a responsibility, and I think repatriation, rematriation, all of those kind of processes would be great. Like, I think that's definitely what we should do. Yeah. And I really don't like the fact of the matter that it's kind of discussed about as if it would be such a radical thing. Because, like, I mean, in the end of the day, there's like this grave injustice, and we still see it playing out quite clearly today. There is like kind of this one planet that we are living on that we kind of need to that we have the responsibility of actually being stewards for in the end of the day. And I think that's one of the things, for example, as well, like when it comes to responsibility, I'm really indebted to like indigenous thinkers and practitioners and knowledge holders. Of course, especially like many of like Sami friends and organizers that like have taken me by the hand and like supported me and helped me understand like some of the things that I'm talking about it today as well. And it's basically this idea that like humans in general, because this is like now we're talking about like a critique, like Western centrist critique or Eurocentrist critique, would be bad always for the environment or for the planet, basically. And you see it like in conservationism playing out quite clearly. No, the idea is to sort of, the best way to take care of a land is to take out all of the humans and just leave the land to regenerate itself. And considering like where a lot of those places come from, it's already, of course, this is already better than it was before in terms of the maybe exploitation that happened there before. But it's really not, and this is like what a lot of indigenous folks are telling us and showing us, actually, it's not really how we nor the lands that we are part of have been developing. Like we have been co-developing. So there's a certain role for us in relationship to places, in relationship to waters, in relationship to like the plants and other relatives that are living like in the lands, just as we do. And so I think there's a responsibility for ourselves in relationship to our ancestry and our future ancestry, like the generations to come, that we take care and nurture the communities that we are a part of. And when I say communities, I mean like extended beyond sort of just as humans, because I mean we all drink, we all eat, we all need to sleep somewhere. We need medicine at some point. Like none of us is born into this world like isolated in this, in this quite Western liberal understanding. Like we are always coming into the world being dependent on someone to take care of us, and also a place to take care of us, right, in that regard, in the end of the day. So I think that's a really something that actually transcends a little bit. Like everyone, I think it's a question that people should probably ask themselves in the end of the day, how they feel about whether they have responsibility in this regard and what their role in can be. It's not like that everyone needs to do like everything or whatever. Like no, and I'm certainly not the one to give you your answer. Like you have to understand it yourself. Like what you think is like your position in the end of the day.
Yeah. Now you are talking also about Germany. And you're talking about green movements in Germany, and I know it for a fact that at this point there are so many people that are very frustrated and may or may not be shocked with the level of apathy of the German left with what's been going on.
Yeah.
And I think from my own experience, there are two kinds of people. One type, and that I relate to, is people that are shocked because they didn't know how bad things were. And the other type, they were like, yeah, I'm sure that's very, very predictable that the German left will be like this. And I'm talking, of course, about what has been happening within the Zionist Palestine context, etc. But you also talk about this in the context of climate change and how green movements in Germany can also be very problematic.
Yeah,
in a way.
Yeah.
Would you explain this to me?
Yeah, I mean, this is what I was just talking about in terms of the responsibility. For me, it's not, again, like, be careful, maybe to be clear here, that it's not a individualized, like, responsibility. It's one thing to figure it out for yourselves, but then again, just like to be clear, also you are in relationship to like a place and lands and waters and people, like community. So you are going to be held accountable, like for whatever answers you give to yourself. You need to check in like with those communities, like what they think about your answer as well. Because if you're like, so this needs to be contextualized. And this is the reason why I engage a lot with like the different organizations and movements that where I've been kind of growing up in and that I'm connected to since I was born, like and raised in the south of Germany. And so for me, like after all of these years that I've been like going around and being part of organizing as part of different struggles, like now I'm like returning almost a little bit to like this context and trying to help out and provide some different understandings and practices like in those contexts. And so in Germany, I think this is like a really critical moment at this point. It's really scary to see what's happening there. I do, though, think that like quite clearly this is an intergenerational issue as well. So, I mean, talking about it with my grandparents and with my parents and generally like people from all kinds of generations, quite honestly, like bringing up certain topics that are definitely uncomfortable for people in Germany, for a lot of people in Germany to talk about, like racism and colonialism, for example. It's really important because we see how the fact that we don't have those conversations, or if we have them, they are from a very specific angle. Like maybe there's a very multiculturalist angle to it. So, you know, like for example, that Germany since Second World War is just like one of many countries that have been trying to develop in the Western system and blah blah. But no, like Germany has really been like sending weapons all over the place to countries where it was very clear that they are fighting like anti-colonial resistance and decolonization struggles. And this is something that we know like since the 50s, like Germany has been doing. And so for us to not have these conversations, I'm asking like, why? Like who has an interest that we don't have those conversations? And from a sort of, I guess from a political struggle perspective, but also from thinking about belonging to like a broader movement of people that are wanting to recognize our relationships like that we have transnationally, like us talking now here together, for example, as well.
Absolutely.
Like this is a really important part to be able to understand and connect with each other. Here I am. Like, how did you get to be here? Like, how did you get to be here? And what are those stories like?
But what about your own understanding of these configurations? Mainly, we see, for example, in the UK, in France, and many other places, people can see what's wrong with Zionism. People can see. You even have, I mean, we have always had Jewish movements that talked against Zionism and even against Israel, etc. But we haven't seen anything like the German left. That in a way you just don't see it. To what extent? To what extent can we actually explain the complexity there? Because on one hand, people can look at Germany and can say like, you of all people should understand. You get what I mean? Like you guys should understand what's happening there. Like there are so many parallels here. And to just, it's like you. I don't know if this is a superficial take, but it's like you want to go back on something, you feel guilty about something, but then it's the only compass that you cannot see anything else. That you cannot see the monster you created. You get what I mean? In a, as I say, in a superficial way. But the monster you created is resembling so many things that happened that you guys are ashamed of and avoiding talking about, etc. But then no one is talking about that within the left.
So I mean, of course, this is a very complex question, and like I definitely can just offer like some of the ways how I'm approaching it, trying to understand it together with the people that I'm in touch with and speaking, and let me connect this a little bit actually to like the research and the Fenonian background that I actually have and the work from Sylvia Wynter especially. So I think about it as like the connection between what Fenon has been calling sociogeny and ontogeny. Very complex like words, but in the end of the day, it kind of looks at how we fictively like construct stories about who we are and how we tell the world who we are. That's one part. But then we are also performing this, we are enacting this, we are living according to those stories. And these two aspects are like playing into each other, right?
Okay.
And so in Germany, like we see a quite strong reflection of post-racial and post-colonial discourse since the Second World War, which does not really have that much to do. So this is the fictive story that Germany tells itself and the world about, like, now we will not have racism in Germany anymore. And
but they are still in Namibia where they are saying that.
This is a of course, like, yeah, definitely, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Like there's like so many aspects, and that, like I mentioned before, the weapon industry, but so many other German industries are like literally all over the place. They have been still like in South Africa benefiting like big German companies even after the UN embargo and stuff like this. So historically, like, this kind of story that Germany tells itself and the world of who Germany is different from the actual like material reality of what's going on. And this is a similar thing that we see, for example, in Sweden as well when it comes to the Sami, right? But here, for example, both with Germany and with Sweden, there's, I think, like in the broader debate around colonialism, for example, people are often thinking like, oh, but those countries, they didn't have like that many colonies, or they were not so big in like imperial like grandeurs and whatever. But I mean, this is kind of skewing the reality a little bit about how like those processes spilled over into different countries like all over the place, right? So like Walter Rodney writes about this like really, really well, for example. And there's more people that write about it. But for example, in Hamburg, you had like one of the biggest like sugar harbors for sugar and stuff like this. And like, why? Like, where does this come from? Like, and you have like a lot of these kind of relationships all over the place. Because, for example, in Sweden, in Sapmi, like in the northern parts, in the lands of the Sami, you have a lot of mining, and historically there's a lot of iron mining as well. But for example, again, like Walter Rodney writes about how actually it was first through like connecting this iron with other minerals, especially through colonization that they got access to, that made this like steel much, much, much stronger and so more efficient for like a capitalist project that was like industrializing at the time as well. And this is kind of the aspects that we see a continuum of how the stories that Europe tells itself, like, and this is of course a little bit generalizing, because here we have to also differentiate like Western Europe, Southern, like there's a lot of differences here. But in the project of like European conquest, like you can still see very clearly how certain nations have been benefiting more than others from this process quite clearly.
One of the core themes, this is something that is nagging me while I'm listening to you, which is I want to talk about development, because especially when we talk about Arab countries, when we talk about African countries, when we talk about even Caribbean countries, you hear the word development a lot. Like, this is the epitome of good that we can do to these countries, developing countries, or these underdeveloped countries. But also, a lot of the projects that you're talking about, a lot of the policies that you're talking about are development policies. Within Europe itself,
right?
Yeah. So and this is interesting. This is very interesting, because we're talking about development here, but also we have the same narrative of development. Like literally, it's like we are trying to tell them, yeah, develop us too. Like we want to develop here too. So yeah.
Yeah, and there's definitely this is like important to also understand, like. That there is, even when I'm speaking about all of these bigger like kind of structures like modernity, colonialism, and all of these aspects, to not deny like the agency that are still like within communities and how they are facing those aspects, right? And like the whole idea of developmentalism is like super important when it comes to this. And for me, I'm often thinking about this as sort of the one aspect is the land and the super material kind of like I was saying, the enactment of who we are. But then again, like this cosmogonies. Oh, I don't know how to pronounce it. Cosmogonies, I think, yes. So origin stories, basically, in the end, right? So how do origin stories help us to project ourselves into the future, basically? And developmentalism, like as an idea or development, is really like building on this. It's like, oh, if you only work hard now, in the future, you will be better off or something like this. And of course, there's a certain level to how this can make sense. But on the scale that we are talking about, when it comes to the idea of development nowadays, it often disregards then the actual structural limitations that are put to like different people. So the closer you are to system like places of power, the closer you are to a government, or the closer you are to like people that can move a lot of resources, which in our times often means people that have a lot of money, the more you will be able to make that projection into the future a reality as well. And so it's like really helping to reproduce itself until you are like, hold on a second, like why would I be projecting myself into the future in this way? First of all, like what are the different things that I'm aspiring to, like hoping to? Because a lot of the times, like it kind of neglects the possibilities and the realities that we are already having today, and it's kind of making us dependent on, for example, earning more money or things like this, to an extent that is like, okay, are you just interested in earning more money, or are you hoping to, with that money, to achieve a certain thing or get a certain thing, right? And so, of course, in a capitalist system, like if you want to do a certain thing, like money helps you a lot to do that, but it's not necessarily the only way how you can get there. And again, here, of course, it's important to differentiate. Like, there's a reason for why some communities and are pushed into a way of living where money becomes such a central point of literal survival. Like here, like really talking about like, I don't know how to get my rent together. I don't know how to pay for my medicine that I'm relying on. I'm not sure how I will be able to feed my kids or nor myself. And so all of these things make it structurally like very hard for you to project yourself like in the story of where you want to get in a more like liberatory way, I guess, right? Because you are already like set back in a sense and made very dependent on a lot of existing structures. One of those critiques that we find when people talking about this is around welfareism, for example, as well. And this connects quite a lot to development questions as well. Like sort of in a liberal context, how like, and there's actually concepts like welfare colonialism and stuff like this. And of course, and yeah.
So from your engagement with Sami communities, how can development be destructive?
So I think, like, first of all,
you already mentioned some points, like the changing of ways of life, just imposing certain formulas that you have to follow this to be developed or for things to work, etc. Which resonates with things also that happens, at least in to my knowledge, in Egypt. Even when the British came to Egypt, they introduced political economy in a way, and the fiscal policies that they always advised for, and well, for your development you have to do this and this and that.
Exactly.
This resonates until now, until like nowadays Egypt. People usually have this huge doubt when it comes to talking about I don't know, the having loans, for example, from the IBF, or dealing with consultants from the West, or this resonates until now. So you can even see it in the nuances of how I don't like the word, but how common people, how the public in general express their ideas about what's happening, about the borrowings, about but yeah, to this point, and back to the main point that we're talking about, what would a community like the Sami teach us about how development would also be destructive in some cases? Because I remember in your article there was a talk about even the windmills and how they affect their ways and their travels, etc. That is a core part of their lives.
Yeah. So the things that comes with like kind of the idea of progress, which is like tied to I from my reading, but also from people like Sami Aramin or something, like as a critique of Eurocentrism. It's kind of understanding that time moves in a linear way, and that, for example, one very clear thing that you also see in academia a lot is that you have like sort of an accumulation of resources and of knowledge and all of these things that in and of itself has like an intrinsic value that is positive.
But local knowledge.
Huh?
We're talking about local knowledge.
No, I mean, like in terms of the idea that development and progress has, as like how we are moving through time.
Yeah,
it's kind of seen like it's in a linear way, and we are benefiting from it as we go. If we follow additional steps, which is like following, of course, like the Western model most of the time, and this includes a lot of other assumptions about already how the state of the world is today. Like it assumes that, for example, the way of engaging with things like the environment, doing environmental policies and blah blah, is the best way to engage, like the dominant way of doing that. So this is the best way to do it, and what indigenous communities are showing, to me at least, when I look, is very clearly that this is not the case at all. And so, for example, the Sami used to have like a consensus-based decision-making for like collective processes. And this is like a curious kind of tension also, right, with Sweden, which again like prides itself of being like this pillar of democracy and of rights, and like, so you basically have like a society that or a colonial kind of a project that destroys like a consensus-based decision making and replaces it with like a sort of, actually in the case of the Sami, more like a proto-representative democracy thing, because even in the lands where the Sami come from, in Sapmi, like they only have the right for Sami parliament, which can decide on a very small part of what actually concerns like the people who live in Sapmi. And so, but also here the idea of representative democracy, as it's tied to not a numbers game in the end of the day. Like how many votes do you get?
And campaigns and money.
Exactly.
Politics.
And mostly this is actually tied to the idea of like a sort of, and this sounds great in theory, this like deliberative kind of argument style or whatever, that us two are like conversing with each other and we are arriving at the best argument for both of us, which again is like a very linear way of thinking, because it doesn't include who has the right to actually make a decision about this. Like, right, I'm already assuming that we are having the same right to make a decision about this place, but you're not like necessarily have this right.
You're not the one affected.
Exactly. For example, like this, you're not the one affected. Exactly. So when it comes to a lot of like this new green projects, which actually a lot of like Sami organizers are calling green colonialism. It's the same thing. So people assume that having wind power, wind industries is like the way to go. But at the same time, it's destroying like the way of living of a lot of people in this place. And that way of living is actually maintaining and helping to take care of the place and the lands and the waters in a certain way, which is actually in the end of the day for the benefit of all of us, because only in this way are we able to maintain like the waterways and the fish that live within it in a certain way. And like there's so many layers. And I think like if you want to really dig into it, I would recommend you actually invite like a Sami researcher, of course, on this. Like
that would be amazing.
But they can tell you a lot more than I can. But these are some of the elements. The same is with forestry, for example, in Sweden. Like, and this is something that maybe it would be like we can tie it, for example, as well to Sudan and the involvement of the UAE and how UAE actually is connected to Germany. Like again, because they have been like, for example, doing like all of these climate negotiations together. And Germany at the same time is buying like a lot of gas from the UAE, and the UAE is like at the same time keeping like a low profile and trying to not be associated with whatever's going on in Sudan, which we know is like they are involved, and not just them, like of course. But the UAE is able to greenwash itself through like a company called Blue Carbon, if I get the name right now. And they are like actively buying up like forests in different countries, like across like the African continent, to sort of greenwash who they are like as a country, right? So you again like have sort of like the UAE jumping onto this, in the end of the day, Western environmental politics, and using the same kind of logic that is happening there to brand themselves as being more green. And so in with the Sami, you see the same kind of thing playing out, or very similar thing at least, where you have a lot of trees and people think that's a forest, but actually it's like much more like a plantation. And if you go there, you will really see it like they are just one type of tree. They all have the same age. They are actively like shaping, like their presence of this one species of tree are shaping the place so that other plants cannot grow like to the same extent anymore. And all of these kind of layers that you kind of slowly like can peel off, and it helps you to understand like how a lot of these ideas around development and green, maybe in the end of the day, are not so green at all.
To what extent should the Global South be concerned with the green movement? Because, and I guess you get where I'm going, but I will stop here. But how do you see the Global South in this context? Do they share the same responsibility and, well, on a global level?
I mean, I think that I don't really am in the position to answer for that, to be honest.
I mean, even globally, the policies that are put have some considerations for the Global South. It's not the same conditions, to my knowledge. It's not the same criteria that is required from European countries, from the US, for example. If I compare, for example, a North African country and the requirements or the conditions that are put on Canada, they're not going to be the same. But also, you being engaged within the sphere of grassroots movements that advocate for or educate people about climate change. Where do you see the Global South in this?
Like, So again, I would think about this in terms of the relationship. So on the one hand, maybe to challenge a little bit like the idea of global souths, I mean, as a sort of very clearly geographically demarked thing, because at least in terms of cardinal directions, I'm not sure if it makes that much sense to think about in this way.
It does. I had this conversation with, we have this production here. It's called Stories of Resistance. And one of the episodes, it was about Ireland. And I remember us having this conversation because some of my friends and my colleagues and the team, they were saying, but well, that sounds like white history. And we had this debate whether us talking about the IRA or the Easter revolt, or would that be white history, or does that belong to the global South? Same conversation you have about Fenon. Is Fenon ours, or Fenon is not? You know.
And like he had this conversation with himself, I think, and a lot of people around him. Yes,
exactly.
I mean, when it comes to that regard, I would push back a little bit in the way that how much we reproduce racist understandings when critiquing racism. And so, for example, there's actually tons of literature about like how the Irish became white and stuff like this.
Same for Italians, I think.
Exactly. And the point is just like to understand that racism, it's like a adaptive project that has been changing like meanings over like history according to the needs that were there to push back on a lot of resistance movement in the end of the days, right? So it's always very beneficial to fragment the solidarities between different people. And for example, like in a context like the US, we see historically how whenever these kind of links were made between different communities, fragmentations were used or reproduced to divide like the people. And sometimes in like viciously violent ways, like for example, the assassination of different organizers that were bringing together like people from different communities, right? Like from the Black Panthers, for example, had like different projects like that. And so when it comes to whiteness as a concept, I think or as a actually also institutional organization. There, I get a lot of understanding from thinkers like Cheryl Harris, who have been working on how whiteness reproduces certain property arrangements. And so the closer you are to existing dominant institutions, the less problems you will face in reaffirming like your claim to land, for example, or your claim to ownership and property and stuff like this. And this does not necessarily have anything to do with the skin color that you have in itself, right? And we see this quite clearly in the way that a lot of researchers are trying to debunk this idea of like how is like that capitalism can save like black people in the US, for example, as a way of moving forward in a liberation struggle. And when it comes to lineages of resistance, this is a similar story, I think. Like in Europe, this is a really important aspect when it comes also, for example, to the relationship to Eastern Europe, because there's historically and still today a lot of racism towards like people from Eastern Europe as well. And it's something that people struggle with how to make sense of. Similar when it comes to Sami, because from is it called phenomenological, like from the skin color, they are perceived as white, but this is literally like the racist perception of who they are and doesn't recognize at all the structural position that the people have necessarily, right? And again, quoting Rodney here,
people like the Sami people, indigenous people, can be more closer to the global South than anything else.
Right. And this is actually like a really important ongoing conversation and struggle, especially, for example, in the Finnish side of Sápmi, where right now the Finnish court is basically denying the definition and processes that the Sami in the Sami parliament on the Finnish side have established for themselves to understand who gets to vote in the Sami parliament and who gets to not vote. And so the Finnish highest court is imposing their own definition on this. And suddenly you have like a bunch of people who get to vote on behalf and to represent the Sami who are not recognized in the Sami communities actually, right? So here you have really a shift, and there's some really strong pushback from Sami organizers who is like, you want to use this identity to vote and get through your new development projects or something like this in Sápmi, in the northern parts of Finland there. But you don't want to actually engage with the struggle. You don't want to engage with the responsibility of being part of the community, just when it suits you, right? And so this is a really important element, I think, of the conversation.
When you talk, especially in the article, when you talked about the German left, and you were talking about this link between racism, fascism, colonialism. I want to bring a term that has been thrown out there, but it would be a good opportunity for you also to explain it to us. Ecocide. When we talk about an ecocide happening in Palestine, is that an exaggeration? According to your understanding?
Yes, but I mean, no, I don't think so. But and this is also based on, Palestinian scholars who have been using the term as well, and to some extent as well. But I don't know. I feel a little bit worried about the idea of ecocide and the way that it might reproduce a perspective that detaches the land from the people.
Explain this.
So, I think that, for example, especially the Zionist project in Israel has been very careful about how they portray themselves in terms of progressive values, right? We know this when it comes to questions around LGBTQ rights and how they have been really, part of
pinkwashing, etc.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The same with greenwashing. We have a lot of projects like this in vitro meat, like lab-grown meat, for example, that is one of the kind of things that Israel has been trying to market themselves.
Yeah.
There is also the way that even they have been, Israeli institutions have been using the planting of new forests as a way of greening the desert, literally, their words, right? And so from a liberal perspective, Western liberal perspective, all of these things are initiatives that are trying to prevent ecocide.
Okay.
But we know that they are actually reproducing not just a terraforming of this place to an extent that it's eradicating old growth olive trees, eradicating ecosystems that have been living there, but who have actually been nurtured by people who have been there as well, but who have been displaced and who have been
what's their benefit in doing that? Is it just part of the development agenda?
I think it's a way of making their efforts look different than what they actually are.
Okay. How?
In the way that this is what I mean. What I mentioned before, when it comes to the Sami as well. A lot of people, when they come to, for example, I still remember also traveling to Palestine and going from the airport to Al-Quds to Jerusalem, and you're passing up all of these forests. But here again, like I have had the privilege from learning from like Sami friends that just because there's a lot of trees, it doesn't mean it's a forest. And so you start to look a little bit more and you realize actually all of these trees are super, super young. They are very, very like first generation basically planted. And so for me, it has been a little bit like, Israel is like the country of like 70-year-old trees basically or something, which of course, I mean, it's very, it's a bit simplified, but in contrast to the generations of people there who have been like nurturing the place, I mean, it's huge. And so then the question becomes, what is green like of those different practices in a way, like, right? What is actually the thing that the type of practices which have been developing together with the place and not just come from the outside and planted in there as a sort of...
It's not the same green.
No, exactly. Like even if you think like, oh, we have understood all of the different consequences and, you know, like because we have research and blah, blah, like we did all of the reports and blah, blah. So we know like that these trees will increase the biodiversity, whatever, or will like decrease the CO2 in the atmosphere or something like that. But then, for example, you can be like, yeah, but also these trees are like maybe taking away like for other species to live there, for other people to live there, literally in the case of Palestine, like, and with the Sami, it's very similar when it comes to that as well. And what is the consequence of that? And this is the question that I think people need to ask themselves more.
Can I seize the opportunity of having you here and ask you to recommend to us and those who want to learn about certain topics, what would be your advice, where to start, what to look at? First, if we want to look at climate change, if we want to learn about climate change from angles that are relevant to us, that are relevant to the people, that are relevant to the underprivileged too. And not just the PR stunts of developed countries. Where do we start? Where can we look?
I think like a strong thing is to like try to understand a little bit or try to understand where you are positioned already, like what relationships you have already, because that's something that falls short a lot of time. Like I think especially in debates around environmental issues or climate issues as well, they can be very abstract and very big and whatever. But I remember like there's this one author that I like, read one of his books, Tommy Orange, who writes in a way like, aren't we all in the end like just stardust? And so the question is really like, where do the materials come from? Like that you are surrounding yourself with. Where is the water that you're drinking coming from? Where is the food that you're eating coming from? And what is your relationship to the people that are bringing you those things, are maintaining that you have clean water, and all of these things, if you follow them along, if you connect and see how those different aspects are linked with each other, actually, it allows you to better understand how you and the people around you are connected to questions around environmental issues and the climate itself in the end as well.
Another question is, if we want to know more about the Sami people and their issues, where can we look?
I mean, there is a lot of like great organizations and initiatives all over the place. I think like if I would name some now, I would probably do injustice, but and again, here also, by the way, I want to maybe challenge myself in the way that that there's this sort of damage-centered perspective that tends to take a little bit foreground in conversations, especially in social sciences, I feel. So with this, I would probably suggest, first of all, like maybe look at festivals like Ridu Ridu, the only indigenous music festival in Europe. And they bring some amazing artists every year, and there's a lot of workshops there. It's like in an area called Alta, or close to it at least, in the very, very north of the Norwegian part of Sápmi. And this actually has a historical like importance, that place, because there have been like several rebellions and like protest movements over the years that Sami organizers, even just the last years, like during some mobilizations, are still emphasizing and are actually even reenacting like some of the same protest moments, right? So over various generations. And so that's something that I would look into. Just check out who are the people that are coming there. I think probably a lot of people would be surprised and excited also to find like artists who are doing like lots of different types of music and speaking and expressing themselves about a lot of different issues that are very, very relevant. Then there's, of course, like different other, that depends on what you're interested in. Like there is like movies, for example. One that is pretty good that I can recommend is called Sami Blood, I think in English, by Amanda Cannell. That talks about the way that, or addresses the way that eugenics have been used against the Sami. So literally a practice of like social Darwinist, like pseudo-racist like theory, or not pseudo-racist, but racist, but pseudoscience, and how this has intergenerationally impacted like people, Sami people. I don't know, you can find it online somewhere, I'm sure.
No, I think, well, that's because we need to talk about this also, but if there is something I would ease into as our last chapter of the conversation can be the state of grassroots that work within circles of climate activism, etc. There are many talks about this schism also that is happening over Palestine and over what has been going on. What's your insights on that? What has been happening within these movements, within these grassroots movements? There are certain popular discussions about Greta and the schism she's causing, but also I know this goes much deeper than this within grassroots movements also. How do you see that? What can you tell us about this? About what's going on? Your analysis of her.
Well, I mean, I think like there's a lot of pain and a lot of grief, and like some people are reacting in a way like paralyzed, don't know what to do with. Then there's some people that are starting to ask more questions because of this. And in different contexts, you see this playing out in different ways, like, right? I think there's so again, like what I can speak to is really more like the movement spaces that I'm close to. And I see a lot of problems that have not been like addressed for a really long time. There's definitely missing sort of a vision for why and we are organizing in a certain way and not other ways that should be had. Like, for example, thinking about like protests or something, they are great. They have definitely their value. But the question is for what? Like, for me, for example, going to be, or being part of a protest, one of the strongest elements is to not feel alone, like to recognize that I see you, like, okay, I'm not going crazy. Like, this is actually like happening, and like screaming out about it is like a totally genuine, like legitimate like response, and doing that collectively is like really important. Then to think that the protest is also gonna create like a political change in and of itself, like in terms of like that maybe if we are just like a few thousand more people, this will make a difference. This is a bit more tricky, I think, because, I mean, historically, it's also something that we have seen is not necessarily the case.
Not effective, you mean?
I mean, I think like just the protest march in itself is not going to create like the change. Not a new article that you write is gonna create like the change or something, right? And so I think that for a lot of these organizers that are working like tirelessly as much as they can in support of Palestine, and a lot of other struggles that are right now like really important that really need to be engaged in, like in Congo and Sudan and you name it. In the context where I'm working in, it's really important to maybe, instead of trying to do like everything at once and play almost into like a capitalist sense of like having to have solutions for everything right now, and like to instead like intentionally slow down and be like, hold on a moment, where are we actually moving towards with the type of activities that we're organizing?
Right. So we have talked about so much so far, but and maybe because there is a lot to unpack, and it's really difficult to concentrate all of it, and unless it's rehearsed, unless you really So in a way, I think one thing that we can end with are two things, actually. One is I would like your final explanation to climate change, colonialism, racism, fascism. You're drawing quite a picture here.
Yeah.
And I think that needs a bit of a portrayal from you. That would be very nice. And then if you can also talk about why climate change matters to everyone, especially that you mentioned the relationship with the land, this innate thing, or at least something that should be addressed as an innate thing.
Yeah.
So maybe we can end on that note.
Okay, but let me start with the second one then, I guess.
Yeah.
So what I've been trying to get at, I guess, through like the different aspects that I've been raising about the origin stories of who we tell ourselves in the world, who we are, and how we enact those actually in the end of the day. It's for me really a connection through time and space in the end of the day, and how we conceive even our relationship to time and space in the end of the day. And to understand how much this is already tied into a certain story and into a certain material reality that we are living in, which is not a manifest destiny, which is not like the logical outcome of human history or something like this. No, there's like very specific kind of things that happened like in history that continue to happen that reproduce those relationships that we have to time and to place. Like, why do we think that our countries or cultures need to develop one way, and as if there are no potentialities of developing in any other way, right? Or becoming anything else, like, or actually also seeing how it's already something else, like in many regards. And the same is kind of true for the relationships that we have, like to things around us and whatever. Like I know, like for example, one of these challenging thought experiments around climate change is always when it comes to airplanes and flying. And for me, for example, I'm thinking that in general, like just taking this technology and the possibility of connecting people through like air travel is amazing. Like that's so cool. Like what we that it's possible to do it. Then that it's tied to a whole industry and like racist border policies and a certain infrastructure and certain like consequences on the environment and on people because of this. This is a different story, but the vision in and of itself of being able to connect people through air travel is like amazing, I think, for example, right? And so here with this regard, and this is maybe a little bit of a provocative like thing to say, of course, but I think like looking at speculative fiction, for example, is really exciting for me in the way that it offers us glimpses into different potentials and different realities, basically, that could become our reality if we wanted to push like in this direction, right?
Can you give me an example?
An example. I mean, for example, right now, one thing that is happening that I'm pretty excited about is this new telescope that have been sent up into space, which is like exploring and sending us pictures from parts of the universe that we have never seen before. And so it's like literally every picture that we get from it is showing us a part that human eyes have not ever seen before. Then you can question whether this is a necessity if we need it or nothing or anything or whatever, and whether it's actually a beneficial thing, like considering all of the issues that we have going on, like on our planet, little planet Earth, basically. But again, like in general, the idea of being curious about space in that regard, like is something that has been inspiring, like our ancestors always, and fascinating people like always.
It's amazing that you are talking about this because I'm sure people might be listening to this and they're like, what the hell are they talking about? Like, why are they talking about space? But I think something that came to my mind is it's fascinating that we are talking about such a thing in this context. We are talking about the very soil you're stepping on,
yes,
but also the very vast,
yes,
of the horizon where you could see before and where you only can see now because of the technologies.
right.
I think in that term, alternative realities are just things that we can actually learn from reality also. It's not alternative in sense of literary fiction, although that's important because many of these things has been people like Ursula Le Guin, for example, and talking about but also it's fascinating. I think that the portrait that you're painting in a way that is we're talking about the very land, and we're talking about the literature of Bell Hooks when she talks about belonging, for example. But we're also talking about this doesn't mean that you don't care about space or technology or whatever, but it just doesn't have to be this way.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's definitely true. And I think maybe it was even Ursula Le Guin who was talking about like the way that speculative fiction is like not something that that is going to happen in the future. It's like a story that happens now, right? And so when you have like authors like Octavia Butler is quite well known, but there's also Nnedi Okorafor, which I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name correct, who are offering like stories about visions of the future today, right? Like, I mean, we are reading this book today, like we're watching the movie today. And so how does this impact the literal way you are perceiving your relationship to time and space again, like in the end? And it's exactly like you say as well. I think also, like, I remember there's this quite famous book that was famous in the last years. There's a Netflix production from Cixin Liu, The Three Body Problem, and it's a trilogy. And there's this one scene like in the book, and I was just like, what? Where the protagonist is, and no spoilers, by the way, is like at some point falling through ice. And the description that he gives of this moment is like, I cannot puzzle it together completely, but it's like kind of how the light fractures in the water as the person falls through the ice. It's like reproducing the image of the stars in the sky.
Okay.
So it's like a double image, because you have like actually the stars above the character, and then the stars reflecting in the water that the person is falling through. And so I think this is this very kind of pretty special moment that we are like witnessing, I guess, with all our loved ones that are with us here, that we maybe again, to be honest, become aware of our relationship to each other on Spaceship Earth in the end of the day, and what that means in the vastness of space, but also how space is like kind of part of us. Like we have like shooting stars and stuff like this, which are showing a very clear, like, I'm always thinking like, damn, shooting star, so beautiful, so awesome. Where did you come from? Like, damn. Like, and when did you come from? I have no clue. Like, this is beyond my understanding. But it's still happening right now. So it's really allows like yourself to stretch your mind and your feeling also, and sitting with this like, whew, okay, there's like this piece of metal that has been traversing from, I don't even know, like another galaxy, whatever, and now it's hitting us here now, like
a whole other level of belonging.
Right. And so I think it challenges us also a little bit to think about how all of these things are playing out in our real life as well, like on the ground, like on planet Earth, like as well, how we are traversing. And I mean, the chances of us two like sitting here and all of the support like folks that you cannot see, damn, like I mean, linearly, again, here we
shout
come to this.
Shout out to the production team.
Shout out to the
people.
Like linearly, if I would try to tell you like short and entertaining stories, or if I would try to make sense of this, it's very, very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of when I was before we met now, I was in Sapmi and meeting some friends and talking to them there, how to try to make sense of our relationship, like right now here, and give you like a super logical, smooth, like explanation and putting things in boxes to make sense of it. It's super, super difficult. And in the process, it also kind of strips away of just seeing like, being like, some things are just chaotic, like they are emerging like adaptively, and it's not necessarily the sum is more than the parts, basically.
Yeah.
So even if you try to break it down a lot, like it doesn't really get to us being here together.
Yeah.
And so this has like profound impacts for me on questions on belonging, on questions of love, of community, of like all of these aspects.
Everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so a final note would be that portrait you drew, the climate change,
right?
Racism, fascism, colonialism.
Oof, back to that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe like a final message on that.
Okay, so maybe I can go a little bit more into mentioning like the research that I'm actually doing, because it's kind of connected to this. So
yeah, please. Best
I
of luck, by the way. I know that this is your final stage with
yes, thank you so much. I came to this research through the work that I've been doing with different communities over, like, since Tiny Flow, and growing alongside like those different initiatives and activities. I have been already pretty familiar with issues around colonialism and green colonialism, especially how it's impact like indigenous communities. But then of course, it's kind of impossible to talk about this without racism, because of how like racism was really like imposed as part of like a colonial project as well. Just as like a lot of other systems of oppression, right? And in the end, maybe one thing that's, for example, that already struck me when I was trying to tying colonialism and racism back to like especially Western movements and understandings of the environment, is that these aspects are always seen as a sort of issue of how do you call it? Allocation, basically, like an inequality, like a discrimination or something like this. So basically, it's more seen as an outcome of so you have an environmental problem, and the way that it plays out is that it creates a certain discrimination, which can be due to like colonial or racialization or stuff like this. And what I already realized quite early in this like more Western environmental understandings is that it's never understood that maybe there could be like colonialism and racism, and those create an environmental issue. Like this is not recognized that it can be this way as well. So, for example, for an intersection analysis, it's really, really problematic, and you see this in a lot of movement spaces where like the climate crisis as a systemic issue is seen as the highest priority, and then we need to sort of underneath there are all of these other issues like I don't know, like sexism, colonialism, racism, capitalism. They are all underneath, right? And this is sort of the systemic view that they have, but that a lot of people have. That's like the dominant way of seeing it also in a lot of like, still in a lot of UN negotiations and stuff as well. Everything can be fit like under this. And it's much harder to understand how they are like actually playing out on a similar level. Like, and so this is the part of colonialism and racism and understanding that they are not an outcome of environmental issues, but they are like an environmental issue, if that makes sense. Like
absolutely,
yeah,
it does.
So and the point that I found that when it comes to fascism, it's something that I've been, of course, in terms of kind of generally the tendency of the very brutal violence that we are all witnessing like quite intimately on our phones, like in these recent years, which is like the violence in itself is not necessarily that new, but the fact that we can look at it on our phones, like in our beds, that's of course a new aspect for a lot of people. And how
there's a lot of this a huge difference.
Yes.
Also. Because even with the digital sphere, we're still talking about what kind of space is this?
Yeah.
Because it's, after all, it's also entering my space.
Yes. Yeah.
And it affects my perception of my surroundings.
Definitely.
So I am watching a genocide.
Yeah.
I am.
Yes.
And in a way, it depends, of course, how you perceive it in terms of the digital and the real and you know, the interconnections between this and that within an actual space. But in a way, you could very much say that this is entering people's spaces. You know?
Yeah, definitely. Like this is something like earlier we were speaking a bit about like the movements also and what's like issues are happening, and like this is why I think like this stopping and understanding like how this is conditioning us collectively in a really massive way, like that it's important to understand like how like because it's like it's very scary and it can be very isolating in all of those aspects.
But to be honest with you, at the risk of saying something that I will regret saying, I think one thing that gives me hope is the videos I see of the demonstrations in the UK, the demonstrations in Canada, the demonstrations in the US.
Yeah.
Because I see us I see, second generation, third generation migrants of Arab descendants. And at the same time, I see communities, European communities and American communities, United States or Canada, etc. And I think this is amazing. This is fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think no one has any excuse to lose hope.
Yeah.
Because we do exist. And we do exist in ways that are very new.
Yeah.
And that are very, very strong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because everything around you can make you I'm going on a rant here. But I do believe that what we are watching around the world is something very new.
Yeah.
Our generation is something new, honestly.
Yeah.
So
yeah, definitely.
That was absolutely amazing and a great fortune to have such a conversation.
Thank you.
And I hope that we will have other conversations in the future. I would very much love to hear about the updates of the engagements, first on your PhD and on the engagements and on what's going on with the Sami people. And I will try actually to make sure that here in Tanween also we can reach out and see if we can help a little bit in raising awareness and in reaching out, because thank you. It has been lovely.
Like, I mean, let me say this maybe in the end, because it's kind of a nice way of tying it together, like what you were just saying, in the sense, again, of the origin stories, like that I mentioned before, and how we are enacting, like, those as well. Like, so we are sitting here together, so we are enacting a certain origin story of why we think that we, like me and you, the team again, are coming together here. And the fact of the matter that we are kind of conscious about, like the broader aspects of the moment that we are witnessing, that you have just described, this is a very powerful aspect, right, of this moment as well, because it's not just happening to us and it's like, what's going on? No, we can actually like tell a story about what is happening right now to us, and this allows like a lot of people to connect with each other. And why I think it's also so important to really take your time and listen like very actively and carefully to the different stories that a lot of people are telling right now, and to actually also be a little bit brave, I guess, in telling your own, as difficult as it might be.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, Florian, it has been lovely having you here. And thank you everyone who is watching us or listening to us. Please make sure to watch or listen to our other episodes of Marginalised Notes. We have also other productions on Tanween English that you will love, Southern Insights and Stories of Resistance. And until next time, thank you.